So I want to talk about understanding Chinese cultural differences. And my main point would be that people are the same everywhere. But it's like you've got bones, flesh, and skin. Um, we are the same. But when you're trying to do business with China, coming from our perspective, the Irish perspective, or the European, a small difference is hugely significant. So what we need to do is put it into a structure. So in this, there are only two slides, so the structure and this slide might look a little bit daunting at the start. But essentially, there are just two dimensions here. Down the rows, you see things about your needs and your likes and what you value. And right across the columns, you're talking about relation to yourself, in relation to others, in relation to the world. So let's start with the latter one. Essentially, the Irish are much more about themselves. They're much more individualistic. So have a look at that and you see that we're more concerned with how we feel, our emotions and stuff like that. Chinese are much more into the group. They really have a lot of time for the family and the country and the company and so on. If you were to go into a room where there are 7 or 8 Irish people, you may be sure there are 7 or 8 individuals all doing their own thing. But if you go into a group where there are 7 or 8 Chinese people, they will know who the others are, the group, who is more important to who is connected to what. And so in the diagram on the slide, you see circles within circles within circles. They already know the hierarchy, they already know the status of the different people. Interestingly, on the right, which is more the situational one, the world, which is represented by the US, they're more like individuals, but each individual isn't just an individual per se, it's an individual going somewhere. So this person is more successful, this person is wealthier, this person is, whatever. So actually, maybe they may be more different there. So now let's work down the columns and let's do the China one first. So what you see there underneath them is the political, cultural and religious. Political is about their needs. And China has a great deal of needs because it's a very large population, over 1 billion, most people poor, lots of threats from the fact that they're trying to do so much so quickly. They were invaded many times, including in the 19th century. So lots of concerns about politics and about control. And a lot of the changes, Westerners would think that this is a communist country. When, in fact, the only thing of communism that they've retained is the need for political control. And look down after that, the cultural area. Chinese culture is very important. It goes back thousands of years. And then at the bottom one, the religious one. People might think it's a communist country, there's no religion. Actually, I found that Chinese people are very religious themselves. And huge respect for the family. If somebody dies, there are all sorts of ceremonies and so on. Very religious people. Not in the sense of religion as politics as we might think of it in the West. Now look at the Irish one. If the Chinese are more focused on needs, as in the first row, physical, political, economic, we're more focused on the psychological, sensing, learning and trusting. And so we're much more emotional. Now, in terms of connecting between the two, we're very emotional, for lots of good reasons for trust and distrust, but we also have a political background, something similar to China. So we have an empathy with them. They are somewhat similar, more political, but they have an issue to do with trust and distrust of foreigners and so on. So we have a lot of commonalities. And the point that I would be suggesting is that there could be a commonality in the cultural area, some kind of genuine learning together based on friendship. Apart from all of those things, in terms of the world, both China and Ireland skipped the Industrial Revolution. So the Industrial Revolution, the banking revolution, we both skipped that, which means that we went from basically a rural agrarian sort of farming and fishing community straight through to a modern high-tech service economy. So we have a lot in common in the way that we do things. So let's move on from there, because there's another aspect. This structure that you see in this slide is about how we relate subjectively. Going down the rows, it's how we do make our commitments or to what we want to do, and going across the columns, how we relate extrovertedly. Within this, we have another way of looking at things. It's a balance with the first one. So if the first one was subjective, this is objective. And in fact, the whole theory of nomology would say that you've got nomos, which is the economics and objective stuff, and the ologies, the psychology and sociology, is the subjective stuff. So we've got a balance between both. So this is the other one, and this is the second slide. So this is all about balance. It's all about doing things objectively. And we use this a lot for strategy, but this is very important in China and in the East generally. And a lot of it is influenced by Confucius. And you'll see on the right who talks about being in harmony. And it's important that people agree with each other. And then on the left, you're talking about people not in harmony and disagreeing. And it goes back to Confucius. And there are some arguments about what Confucius actually said. I mean, some people say that he says, sometimes I'm in harmony, sometimes I'm not in harmony. That's harmony. And others think that maybe it's been reinterpreted as harmony is good, disharmony is bad. Anyway, that's one side of it. Look at top and bottom, the place, people dimension. On the top, you've got the direct action and power and hierarchy and so on. In a Chinese society, because of this group thing that I talked about earlier, hierarchy is very important. Your state is very important. There is such structure in the whole society in China. When I ask my students, mixture of Irish and some Chinese, is there anybody here who knows one person who knows the Taoiseach quite well? And usually one or two people put up their hands. I ask the same about, is there anybody here who knows somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody about, say, 10 jumps to the President of China? No way would any of them put up their hands. They wouldn't have that kind of connection. So big hierarchy, and seniority and rank are very important. So China would be much more up on the top and on the right, which means much more into control by the hierarchy and trying to have everybody in harmony. Now, the opposite, the bottom left in there, which is about confrontation, in that area you find that in a business relationship with Chinese people, they aren't going to be very polite. They're not going to confront you. And if there is a difficulty, they're not going to embarrass you and confront you in front of other people. So you have to be aware of that. So if the top is about hierarchy, power, direct action, and so on, what do people in China do when they have an issue? They go down to the people, to the bottom part, and they will use indirect action. If they've got a difficulty with somebody or with the government agency or the police, or trying to get a friend or their mother-in-law into hospital or whatever, they will use direct action or relationship through people, which they call guanxi. Now, the interesting thing about that is that this is such a difference with the Western culture that there isn't an English word for it. Guanxi, indirect relationship. But one of the things we've been discovering through our studies, and we've done quite a lot of research on Irish people doing business in China, is that the Irish similarities, cultural similarities with China, really show that there is a link, which is not a linguistic link, not in terms of any connections, but we have parallel cultures. And so we would have a similar word, which in Irish is cadrev, which is a very big word. It's like guanxi, it's too big to say relationships or indirect connections or something like that. But tam cadrev agam la shaw, ta cadrev agam, which spills over into the English speaking in Ireland, where you say, well, if you have a problem with that hospital or with getting that person or that parking ticket, whatever it is, I know somebody who knows somebody who can help you, that sort of thing. So that's one of the things that is very important for them because of in Irish, Guanxi in Chinese. But there is another word as well. There are several of these, but particularly the other one that is important is called mianzi, which they translate as face. Now, if Guanxi is translated badly as indirect relationships, translating mianzi as face really loses people. Because, and it really is in Irish, in Irish it would be more iva, is sort of like image or reputation. It's a big word like that. So if you look at it on the bottom of the left-hand side, if you're in a confrontation, why is it that they don't want to say anything to you to upset you in any way? They don't want you to lose face, but they don't want to lose face themselves. So you go into a group of Chinese people and you want to do some kind of business with them, and you start talking with one particular person in the middle of the room. You may be causing a lot of problems with all of them, because you should be talking to that person's boss before that person, and you're embarrassing them in front of the boss, and you're also embarrassing them in front of their own employee who may be there as well. So, and then you're embarrassing everybody who, maybe the person who was your guide or who introduced you to that group, you're embarrassing them by acting, unfortunately acting a bit like an idiot and not really knowing what to do. So that's not losing face, mianzi. But look at it on the other side, which is more the planning side. If we were to look at the way this sort of thing works, okay, this is the basic structure. On the top, you've got committing, self-committing, others, developing world, and on the bottom are adjusting, self-adjusting world and adjusting others. If you were to go into a business relationship, typically what happens coming from an American point of view is they start on the top right, which is we propose we want to do a deal, make a contract, and they then will make a suggestion, and then they will work down to the perceptions of it. If you're doing it from the Chinese perspective, they start at the bottom right. They want to cooperate with you. They want to meet you. They want to build a relationship with you. So it's more people orientated, and they work up to the top right. Where does the mianzi come in there? Well, if the first one, the policy one, is about building a relationship, meeting and introducing yourself to people, talking to them, going out for a meal together, as would often happen in China, and maybe not doing any business for weeks and weeks until you maybe come back again. The second one is the mianzi one, is the face one, the iva, the capability to show what your capabilities are. That's the way that they do that to develop the capacity. It may be a case that, how do you know that you can do business with them, they can do business with you? You mutually show your own capabilities before you actually go and do the business. So typically, in that sort of relationship, as happens with people in doing business in China, you need help. You'll need to work with somebody who will be your interpreter and your guide, but also your cultural guide. And they may, in the end, actually help you do the business themselves. In other words, do a lot of the negotiating for you. Now, the critical thing is that you're building a relationship, and there have been cases where an American working from the top down couldn't understand all this talk, and then at a certain point the interpreter said to him, "I think you've got the business." And the American started getting upset. He said, "I haven't even talked the business yet." And the guy said, "Just keep quiet. You actually got the business. Don't worry about it." Now, and that's where the difference can be made, because in this case, he did get the business because there was a sense of trust had been built. So those are the two sides. As you can see, the subjective one, the 3x3, is on the top left, is the overall structure, but within that you've got the objective structures, and that's basically the whole balance of the two sides between European or Irish relationship with China, you need a balance between both. Same bones, flesh and skin. The skin is the constructs, the words that we use, but the bones are the same. So we're all the same, but because of small differences, when we meet, when we interact, these small differences can be accentuated. So again, the best way to do it, if you're going to, is go there, develop relationships, develop friendships, and always get help. Don't try and do it on your own.